Hi everyone, welcome to another hands-on session. Today I'm joined with Amit D'Souza and we're going to be going over getting started with Argo CD, which is quite exciting for us. Amit and I have worked together at Temenos in the cloud innovation team, and we both have a background in DevOps and cloud, particularly in AWS, Azure, GCP, and sort of all things DevOps. So, Amit, take it away, please.
Hey, folks. Today we are going to be covering Argo CD and application sets. As you're aware, Argo CD is new in the GitOps space, and it has introduced quite a few new practices which are really useful to us in terms of implementing GitOps and enabling our whole team to follow best practices. So today we are going to cover some of the new things which are released in version 2.0 of Argo CD, which is application sets. So to begin with, Argo CD has constantly been used with a couple of different tools combined, which is either Helm charts and customize. Majorly, I have used Helm charts in our demo. And in future demos, I'm planning to show you all with customize as well. Argo CD automates the overall deployments of all our desired applications within our target environments or clusters. You can define multiple clusters within our environments, and you can, based on that, deploy entire application sets, which is a list of applications at one go. In terms of how application set controller works, so application set was introduced because prior to this, we used to use app of apps concept within Argo CD. And in order to enable that better and prevent the use of multiple repositories in order to maintain and manage your applications, application sets got introduced. The way it works is we have a new application set CRD, and the cluster events goes and looks at the application set CRD. Based on that, Argo CD talks to application sets and then goes ahead and deploys all your application within your Argo CD setup. So to begin with, we have created a GitHub repository for the Argo demo. And this has all the files we require for this deployment. Today, we will be deploying 4 separate applications. That is ingress. So let me pull that up. We'll be covering Cert Manager, external DNS, ingress Nginx, and seal secrets. In order to deploy all these applications, you need some of the beginning tools. And we start off first using Helmfile to deploy Argo CD specifically. Now, since we want to follow the GitOps practice, the first thing that we need to set up in our server is Argo CD, and every other application should be set up by Argo CD automatically. So the first major application we are going to set in our case is going to be we are running a script to set it up Argo CD as on a notebook on GCE, and this would we can replace these URLs based on how we prefer our URLs and domains. And I have also put in certain text configuration if you all want to use SSO in future for Google, etc. The other thing that Argo CD requires, or more specifically our CI/CD requires, is since we are deploying it on a GCE load balancer, the load balancer requirements is certificates. So without a certificate, it won't automatically enable the load balancer, and only if it has a valid certificate, we'll be able to deploy the load balancer, which is why we require seal secrets, and we'll run that using Helmfile. After that, what we'll install is Argo CD, Argo CD application set. As I described above, Argo CD application set is a complete set of applications, and it simplifies the app of apps concept. Then we are going to use Cert Manager. This is in order to enable GCE to deploy our certificates. Without this, GCE won't enable or create the load balancer. And last but not least, we require external DNS. And this is required in order to create your DNS entries within your respective cloud provider. So to start off with, I have already created a GitHub Actions pipeline. And this pipeline does a couple of things. You can write this or rewrite this into any CI/CD tool or pipeline provider. And these are some of the actions you'll have to carry out for that task. So the first step is you do a checkout of the repository. You then set up gcloud SDK on your repository. The third step is...
that's if you use Google Cloud as well. So the equivalent of, you can use the AWS CLI or the Azure, the AZ command line tool as well. So in this case, we're just using GCP.
Yep. Similarly, we also authenticate on the GCP cluster. This again is specific to GCP, and Azure and AWS would have their own respective method of authentication. So both these steps are basically performing the authorization into your cloud provider and then authorization into your cluster specifically, so that it has the kube config. The third step is we are installing Helm within this pipeline only. So specifically Helm 3 and Helmfile. So if y'all are not aware, Helmfile is a way to install Helm applications on scale. So rather than individually running a Helm install for every application, you have a single helmfile.t folder and you create your Helm files. And this is the format of having a Helm file, where you have your repository URLs mentioned. You mention what environments you're trying to install these applications on. You mention the releases, and the releases basically are your application names, the namespace where you're planning to install your application. Helmfile also supports automatic creation of namespaces if they do not exist. Your next part is you mention what is the chart and what is the version of the chart. For y'all who are new to Helm and Helm charts, Artifact Hub gives you all these details if you need it. So if you want to find a new chart or any specific application for your current setup and you'll have not worked with Helmfile, you can pretty much search here for, say, sealed secrets. And your Bitnami, for example, has their Helm chart, and they walk you through how you can set it up on your system in terms of installing the application. So you will have to use the repository URL for this, which would generally be provided either in Artifact Hub, and if not here, you will find it in their own respective GitHub. And based on that, we are installing these releases. As you can see, we also have the other file, which is CI/CD. And here what we install is Argo. Here we specify the chart version, the chart name, the namespace we are trying to install to, and where to pull the values file from. Once these are done, you basically run the Helm file. So I will go back to our pipeline. So I have set up kubectl, and then the last and final stage is to actually start deploying our respective Helm files. Here you will notice that I have currently set up environment variables for some of our applications, and all the essential environment variables I have specified here. So anything that you'll need, you'll will have to create a secret within your respective pipeline, or an environment variable within your pipeline and extract it out into these variables in order for you to use this pipeline. In terms of GitHub, you can just create GitHub secrets and then use this similar to how I've already mentioned these variables here.
I've just got a quick question. It's a good one.
Yeah.
So question from Adam, could Argo deploy Argo? So Argo as a service for other teams, if you wanted to, standardize on tooling throughout your business?
Yes. So what Argo can Argo can install Argo again, and it can also maintain Argo for itself. So while in the current case, we have not enabled that. And the reason for that is I have currently created our Argo application with environment variables. So one thing you have to remember is when you're using GitOps, what GitOps requires is actual standard files. And the files have to have values, not random environment variables. So if I replaced all of this with the actual value itself, so in this case, for example, if I change all my environment variables to actually have, say, strings, which is, for example, test string, whatever, doesn't matter. Henceforth, once you first set up Argo, Argo can maintain or manage itself. The only thing is you will have to just put it within your K8s infra, and that is something I will cover when I'm covering application sets. Does that answer your question?
Yep. And what about using application sets for, let's say you have a small DevOps cluster and you have 10 Kubernetes clusters throughout your business. Can you, so you can put the Helm chart for Argo, and then in the application set, you can specify all the destinations to deploy that as a service throughout those clusters, right?
Yes. So the first thing I would generally do is first set up Argo and then set up application set. This is something I'll cover in a bit. And what application does have is the ability to mention your cluster name. So for example, currently I have mentioned demo, and similarly, you can basically have multiple such clusters: demo, test, prod, staging, dev, etc. And we will cover that in 2 minutes. I'll just go back to this and walk you all till that point. So after you set up this, what I've done is, so as I said, right, since I've used a template currently, we cannot, for now, Argo CD in this particular format cannot be set. But assume that this template does not have environment variables and actually has proper values that can then be utilized if you'll have separate environment name YAML files for each of your environments. That will work perfectly like a charm in order for Argo to set up itself. I am setting up a couple of resources, and some of those resources are your secrets as well. And the reason for that is you need a couple of things for Argo to work. If you want it to work as an external DNS provider, you need your respective DNS provider's credentials. Now, one thing you will notice is I am basically walking you all through the actual file, but I'm not worried about any data getting stolen as well. And the reason for that is I've already sealed these secrets. So all of this are sealed secrets now. And the way sealed secrets works is you basically have a sealed secrets controller, you run kube seal command that is also mentioned in your respective README within secrets. So that should be pretty straightforward for y'all once sealed secrets is set up. This is to set up your external DNS. In my case, I was using AWS for DNS. And the GitHub repo token encrypted. This is for Argo to be able to access all your GitHub accounts or repositories. So since you all are going to be using GitHub or say GitLab, you all will have to replace this with whichever repository provider you'll use and the credentials for that. There are 3 essential credentials, and this, what I'm doing here is creating something called a repo cred. What a repo cred is it basically automatically gets detected with this. If we put in this label and annotation, it automatically gets detected by Argo CD, so that it knows that this is a repo template. And for all the repositories where you have not explicitly provided the password or URL, it will access and use this particular credentials in order to access that GitHub to then show you and deploy it. And as I mentioned, finally, once you install the application, if in my case, one of the things with GCE was, if I'm implementing the application and I'm using GCP for a load balancer, I need to update my ingress to have implementation specific rather than prefix. This is not automatically, the Helm chart does not support this change. Hence, I have actually written a patch so that it goes and patches the ingress file. And now coming to the crux of why we are having this talk, that is application sets. Now, I want an application. Sorry,
can I just suggest, can we have a little sneak peek at Argo, like see it visually? I'm just concerned it might be a little bit overwhelming for all this code. If we just look at Argo and say, this is what this pipeline's done, and then we go on to application sets then?
Yeah, sounds good. I will just do a...
So in summary, what we've covered now is we've gone over the GitHub action. So you if you want, you can still just do like a couple of line deployment for Argo, like kubectl, apply the YAML file. This deployment specific how we like it. I mean, you don't have to use cert manager and external DNS. That's just sort of one of our preferences we use. But the way we've done it is it still gives us that automation of setting up Argo itself. Yeah.
So currently, I'm using port forward because unfortunately, the demo gods are not as pleased with me. I ended up running into a issue with one of the load balancers. So I'm just going to run it on the port forwarded setup. So all of this, I pretty much set up using the repository itself. And the way the whole setup is done is, the first step is Helmfile installs it. When Helmfile installs it, you're not going to see any of this information here. This entire 4 application names that you see are purely derived from application set themselves. I will also walk you through why this is red and why these are green, and how we can change that as well. So this, for example, is why we use Argo CD. It simplifies your overview of Kubernetes and what is internally happening within your respective deployments. Say for a developer who's not as aware about Kubernetes as the DevOps engineers, and they don't use Kubernetes as extensively, this helps a great deal, because now they get a vague understanding about what's exactly happening within, say, cert manager as a setup. Here you can see that you have all these multiple cluster roles which are deployed. You also have, custom resources which are there, additional roles that are there, and role bindings, etc. You can see the services that are deployed. And one of the things is the sync OK. That is the primary and main objective that we are trying to achieve. So any changes I make within certificate manager, for example, or external DNS will be reflected here automatically, because the sync is enabled. So if I go just to, say, external DNS, for example, any changes I make here, for example, currently I put in amitdesouza.io, but instead you update it to, say, testing github.io, and you push it out, This change will then be reflected within our application and will go and automatically get updated and detected by Argo CD. The other thing which I mainly want to cover is application sets. And the biggest difference is app of apps concept. So app of apps used to require to have an additional repository where you're just defining applications, which you're going to then go ahead and deploy within Argo. And application sets has helped us to not require this step anymore and simplified the overall process. What I've done here is I've covered two main parts. One is monorepo, assuming that you have all your, say, in my case, I have a combination of monorepo and polyrepo, and I will walk you through both. I use a monorepo to set up my Kubernetes infrastructure, and I use a polyrepo for any other repositories I may have within my GitHub organization. For example, you might have multiple websites that you all want to deploy, or you all might have certain additional applications you all want to deploy. In order to deploy that, I use polyrepo for my setup. So does that cover your question, Brad?
Yep.
Now, specifically, let me cover a couple of things within the monorepo setup. Now, one of the things is, how does Argo CD know where does it need to look for your respective charts, Helm charts, or say customize setups, where have you done it, etc. And the way we do it is using a concept called generators. So generators is a new concept introduced within application sets, and you'll be able to find more details on this link. Give me a sec. Your Argo CD or application set controller has a list of all the generators it has available and how you can use each of them. For a monorepo, I used a combination of cluster generator, matrix generator, cluster generator, and Git generator. First, let's walk through matrix generator. What matrix generator does is it allows you to use a combination of two generators. So what I've done is, first I've mentioned the generator matrix. Then what I've done is I've mentioned two different generators, which is a Git generator and a list generator. As you can see, Git generator and the list generator. I will just put this as well into the chat for anybody who might want to access it. And what the Git generator does is, so as I was saying, the matrix generator allows me a combo. So I have a Git and list generator. You can only have a maximum of two generators in a matrix generator. So if I say add a third generator, that wouldn't work. Your application set will start failing. So you can only have a maximum of two generator combination within a matrix generator. And if you want to use a combination of generators, you always have to use a matrix generator in order to enable that ability for application sets. Now, to first cover Git generator, assume you have a polyrepo and you have a couple of different applications you want to install. How do you do that? So the first thing is you mention where your Helm chart is present. So here, for example, I have mentioned K8's infra Argo. What that does is, after Helmfile has finished installing Argo CD, Argo CD has the setup, but it needs to first install the application set. So once you apply this K8's infra application set, what this internally does is the Git generator goes and finds this folder within this repository. In this, my case, it's Argo demo. It searches for the folder kits infra, which is here. It then goes down to the Argo folder specifically and applies any charts that is present within this. So within Argo, I have only Argo CD application set. So this is just one chart. Now let's talk about the next one.
Can we
It installs.
Can we quickly answer a question? Sorry.
Sure.
So there's a question from Ben. What's the benefit of using a matrix generator versus the two individually, which is list and get?
You cannot use. So when you say individually, do you mean as? Do you mean
I guess
that?
it means without like. I guess the answer is that you need to use a matrix to have more than one, right? So you can't actually do two individually.
No. So say, for example, you want to deploy this individually. What the catch that's going to be there is you can only mention one cluster. So are you planning to create a separate application set for every single environment, which is demo environment is one environment. Now say I have a new environment called test. If this is a test environment, if you have only one single generator, which is this, and there is no list, it will only deploy in one destination. Your destination, normally you can define either via variables, which I've done here, but assume you hard code the value as an actual destination. So in that case, for example, this is only going to be either dev, or it's going to be either test, or it's going to be only prod. So you're going to have only one deployment environment if you do not use the matrix generator. On the other hand, with matrix generator, what's going to happen in this case is these applications first get deployed on demo environment. These applications then get deployed on test environment. And say I have more than this. The same application then also gets deployed on prod dev environment. Now, one of the questions you all might have is, do I really want my application to get deployed on all of these at the same time? Isn't that a risk? My point to that would be the way we would manage that is using revisions. So anything that is not head. So if I'm trying to deploy on my, say, dev setup, I would create a separate application for dev only and put it as feature. I would put in the revision name, so feature /star, etc. So what that would do is it would allow all feature branches to be deployed, but that I would have only for my dev setup. And then what I would do is create a separate application set for all other environments, where it then goes ahead and deploys on test, it goes ahead and deploys on prod, so on and so forth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. He said thanks. It answered the question.
Sweet. Now, once we have done with that step, the next part is I have specifically and explicitly mentioned where the deployment takes place. And as I showed you all earlier, the reason I did not mention this as a specific environment, I called it URL, is so that it automatically picks it up from here. So what this does is these are all predefined values which we have within Argo application set, and URL automatically goes and picks up the URL from here and applies that value. What path.basename does, this is kind of essential. So this is a feature where it basically checks the namespace whether the application exits and syncs it. This is important to us because here we have to essentially mention the namespace. If you do not mention this, what ends up happening is your applications gets deployed on the Argo namespace itself. So whatever app namespace Argo CD is currently deployed on, if you do not mention this, it will just all your applications get deployed on the Argo CD namespace. So you don't want that. And that's the reason we mentioned path.basename. And what is path.basename? Path.basename is the name of your application. So in this case, cert manager's path.basename is cert-manager. So the chart's path base name is this. And similarly for external DNS, it goes into chart. This is the chart, and the base name for the chart is external DNS AWS. And similarly for ingress-nginx, it is ingress-nginx. So what it's doing is it's going into your chart.yaml. Once it installs it, the base name is the parent folder of where chart.yaml exists in. And this is how we ensure that we are installing multiple applications within a single monorepo to get set up automatically. One important thing to cover is exclude. So you can specifically exclude certain folders within your repository. So for example, say within Argo, if I have star, and currently I don't have Argo Workflows, but assume I did have something called Argo Workflows as well, then I can specifically and explicitly exclude that. And what that will do is ensure that Argo Workflows does not get installed when this application set gets deployed. Now, what you'll currently see within the applications I've deployed is all using the single kube infra application set. But what about non-mono repos? How do you manage that? You do want something where mono repos also work as well, right? And that could be applications throughout anywhere within your GitHub organization. Now, in order to take care of that, we have a new concept called SCM provider generator. And what that does is currently it works for GitHub and GitLab more specifically. If you do want it to work for other repository providers, I'm guessing we all will have to contribute back to Argo CD ApplicationSets and probably write in new plugins for that. So in my case, I have explicitly and specifically only done it for, say, GitHub organization. And in that case, what I've done is I've mentioned how we are going to use this and how we are going to identify which specific repositories I want to deploy. Now, in this case, what I've done is I've basically said the organization is Odyssey Cloud within GitHub. Your branches is not deploying all branches. You only want to deploy the main branch. Your secret is your API token secret. And this what you do not need for, as you all are aware, for the API token, you all don't really need the username. And that's the reason you find this respective secret. And I provided the token here. I mentioned the clone protocol is HTTPS, since API token mainly supports HTTPS. And this is the main part, which is the filters. What the filter does is only repositories which have the folder called chart will get deployed. Because not all your applications will necessarily be Kubernetes, will require a chart, or you need to deploy on Kubernetes in the first place, right? You might have repositories where you have cloud functions. And if you're defining, say, cloud functions in GCP, or you have other type of functions, or deploying a database or any other such repository, you don't want them to actually get deployed, or this generator to try and keep searching through that. So in order to prevent that, you put in a filter. I have standardized this throughout the organization Odyssey Cloud, where if we want charts, we explicitly have to have a folder called charts within our repository, and only those repositories get automatically picked up. And again, I've used a combination of SCM provider with list. And what this does is it will deploy all these applications on multiple such clusters. Going back to our same previous question. The other part that I would like to cover is the spec within application sets. So some of the things we mention is project. Project is very specific to Argo CD. So you need to explicitly mention your projects and repositories before you start a deployment. So one thing you'll notice is there is first a cluster. So you define a specific cluster and how to deploy this. You then create a project. This project specifies what are the source repositories that I allowed. In my case, I put in star. What are the cluster destinations that I allowed? So if you want whichever cluster destinations you want, you explicitly need to mention them here. Third thing is what all types of resource does Argo allow to deploy, which is why I put in a star and star. So it pretty much allows it to deploy any kind of cluster resource all throughout the application. And similarly, you will also do it for namespace allow list or deny list. If you want to explicitly mention certain namespaces where Argo CD is allowed to deploy or deny some of them explicitly. So this helps in creating these guardrails for us, for anybody who is not completely aware of Argo CD.
We just have one more quick question. Sorry.
Sure.
So could you explain when you would use the SCM provider generator versus the Git generator?
So the SCM provider is always going to be for polyrepo. So if you notice this list or Git generator, let me go back here. What I have done here is I'm using the Git generator specifically for a monorepo. So I have multiple charts within the single repository. What this repository does for me is it bootstraps my Kubernetes cluster. So I want to set up, say, not just this, right? So I want to set up Argo. I want to set up DNS infra like external DNS, cert manager. Say I want to set up Nginx ingress, which I have specifically installed. Where is it? Here. And say I want to install, say, Jaeger, and you keep adding multiple tools. But if you have all those tools in a single repository, you are going to use a Git generator. You will specify the paths to each of these charts. You can have multiple charts within each of these folders, as I previously showed you. So in DNS infra, for example, we have three different charts here, and it installs all of them. And all we have mentioned is K8's infra DNS star, and it installs all of them. So in this case, you can see that for this mono repo where I'm bootstrapping my cluster, a Git generator is more useful to me since I have multiple charts within this. On the other hand, I would use an application set repo more specifically. If I have, say, 20 different repositories and each of them, I need to deploy each of them separately. Now, in such a scenario, what you're doing is you're going into your GitHub organization. You have to ensure that it needs to be deployed. So there would be a chart folder, or say, you can call it anything, right? You can call it a customized folder. You can call it a chart folder. You can call it anything. And it will only deploy those repositories which have that specific path existing. And I'll just show you a sample of it as well. So as you can see, I've also set up SSO configuration and login, which is why I provided you all decks internally. And here, for example, I have a lot more applications, and these are all from different repositories. They are not necessarily from the same one. So in such a scenario where you are trying to pick up multiple repositories and they are not all stored in your same single repository, that's where you would use the Git SCM provider. And if it is a monorepo, you would use the Git provider specifically, as I showed you. Does that cover it, Brad?
Yeah, he said thank you, and great answers, by the way. Really good.
Okay. So going back to covering the last bits of this. So here, as you can see in K8's infra, I have specifically provided a source. Again, even for this, you do not need to explicitly. So since we have only one repo, this is applicable, as you can see, where I'm mentioning the source. But on the other hand, for for app infra, which is SCM provider, you'll notice that the source I provided as a variable, where it basically goes and picks up whatever is the repository name. It will automatically replace this here, and it will automatically find the URL, etc., that it requires for that particular setup. Now, in my case, I've explicitly using Helm, and that's why you can see I've basically said cluster hyphen values. And what this is doing is it picks up the cluster name, which is demo, and it'll say demo hyphen values. In my specific case, I would not just use cluster hyphen values. I would use cluster hyphen path base name hyphen values. And the reason for this is then it's very easy to identify which particular variable you're supposed to use. So here you can see that I have explicitly have these files, right, where this has the remainder configuration for, say, my application set or my cert manager or external DNS. Now you can see how I would have multiple such values, because your AWS access key on your demo environment or your test environment shouldn't definitely be the same as your prod environment. So you would have a separate, so you can either create something where if you find that all these things are exactly the same, it can either have a combination of how you use it here. So in this case, if say you have multiple files, which is common as well as specific to your environment, then you can enable multiple files here and it will pick up from both of them. So if I enable this, it'll pick up from common as well as my environment file. And if I don't have this and I want to, you find that all your environments have completely unique files. In such a scenario, it makes more sense to have this, which basically takes the cluster name, the path base name, and the values, which is for, in this case, demo is the cluster name, which I have explicitly specified here. So you can see cluster, it's picking up the name from here. You can put whatever name you want. It doesn't have to be exactly this. And that in turn will then be used by your application. So it basically says demo, path.base name, as I mentioned, chart.yaml's parent folder, which is cert manager. So it will say demo hyphen cert manager hyphen values.yaml. And it will apply this specific YAML file to your respective repository for that specific application in order to deploy it. And the important bit is also the destination server, as I mentioned. So your destination server decides where is your cluster getting deployed and what is the namespace under which it gets deployed. So this will specify what is the server or the which Kubernetes cluster it's getting deployed on. And the namespace will specify which path.base name or which specific namespace it's getting deployed on. Now, you all will notice there is a comparative limitation currently on this, where you all can only mention the parent name. But what if I wanted to call it namespace DNS infra instead? Now, in this case, it becomes, in the current situation, it's a little bit complicated, because you all will notice that you can't, if I hard code the value, say DNS infra here, I don't want my Argo CD applications to be DNS infra. I don't want that in the namespace. I want it to be in the Argo CD namespace or Argo namespace. So currently there's a limitation and there is a ticket out in order to update this and change this. I raised the ticket as well and raised certain questions, etc., around it. And as a team, we'll be contributing back to ensure that this is fixed and we start we are able to access more than just the path.base name. So that will be there in future. It is already raised as a request and an expansion, where we will then be able to access not just the path.base name, but the path.base name space name, which is the parent folder or child folder. And it's all going to be accessible using array formats. So that is like you mentioned 0 or 1 or 2, and it will automatically, based on that, figure out how many levels higher it needs to go. For that, let me quickly see if I can find the ticket number for it as well.
I can find it if you want, Amit, while we go.
Yep, I found it.
Okay.
So this is basically an issue which is raised with it, and this is where it's going to be fixed. So this, as I mentioned, covers, and this is where you mention how it syncs the whole setup, right? So you have options of mentioning what is the sync policy, is it automated or not? Are you allowed to prune? So prune means it's going to delete any old files. Say, for example, you delete a specific application, should it delete it from the setup, etc.? Is it allowed to self-heal and make changes? So prune also is to allow any deletion of any leftover applications, etc. Self-heal is it's automatically going to go and heal itself if required. So if something fails, it's going to, obviously Kubernetes does it, but what it's going to do is it's going to ensure that, say for example, I made a manual change, and this has happened a couple of times, right? You can modify your Kubernetes cluster as you want. So say I go and modify, say, an ingress specifically and change something within the ingress. This will just overwrite it. That is where Argo also comes in as guardrails, right? So say tomorrow you have ensured that you have created an application using Argo. There's another developer who comes and he goes onto your setup. He was like, oh, I want to change the ingress name from github.com to github-test.com. And he goes directly into the ingress and edits the ingress and makes the change. Now, what would previously happen is, since you made it inside Kubernetes cluster, it would just be retained, and everybody would be running helter-skelter as to what happened to your ingress. Why did my application suddenly stop working? And nobody would realize immediately that, oh, someone made a change in the ingress manually. Now, that's another place where this kicks in. So say this change is actually made. What happens is self-heal. It goes and self-heals itself, and based on what is committed in the repository, it will go and update your application with that value. So nobody can make manual changes anymore. It enforces good practices where if you want to make a change, please make that change within the repository itself. Now, in case of, say, production issues, so I understand you all would also be concerned. Now, what if I have an emergency production issue and I'm trying to push out a bug fix? A bug fix also should go through certain steps and processes. So even if you're making changes for a bug fix, ideally, if it is not tested, that basically means that you're going to have multiple failures of the bug fix before you finally find the correct bug fix, even in an emergency production case. So even in such a scenario, you want to ideally have it go through the tests which you have set up within your pipeline and only then get deployed to production. And that way we can ensure that people don't make manual changes, and people always follow best practices and only go for Git provided changes. That's where it mainly provides the GitOps scenario. So only changes that are present within your repository will be reflected within Kubernetes. Anything else will be reverted or updated.
And quick question, Amit. So
yeah,
on the sync policy, it looks like that for all destinations, right? So let's say the use case, I want to have a dev environment. I want to play around. I don't quite know what I want yet. Would you make a new application set just for dev, or is there a
Yes.
way that you would? Okay.
No, so as I mentioned earlier, right, like you have to remember for dev, for example, you want to deploy feature branches. On production, you don't want to deploy feature branches. You only want, say, head or master branch. So that's the reason I would actually, for dev explicitly, I would have a separate application set so that I can install every single feature branch. So I don't care, like if I have 20 developers and they're working on a specific repository, each of them will want to see their features deployed on Kubernetes and test it out, etc. So that's why I would ideally utilize this and enable it. And the way I would differentiate, say, if all the 20 devs have different ingress names, so they all would technically have the same ingress name, that's where I would use your git commit shas. So I can always add, say, a git commit branch name to the ingress name so that it's accessible. And even not just the ingress name, but throughout your chart. So you can ensure that your chart has the option where you can modify certain variables, and I can show that to you all as well quickly. So in this specific case, now my application might want to deploy multiple ingresses. So I would probably, sorry. So in this case, you might want to have each of your setups will want to have its own respective different release names. So you could use Git branch names in order to ensure that your release names contain the branch name. And that's one of the ways you can ensure that you have multiple deployments for exactly same repo and exactly same features. That way it's very scalable and all your developers get their own specific deployments or charts within their dev setup. I think I have covered all the topics within this, and we should jump to questions more specifically now.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat. And while we're waiting for some questions to come through, should we take another look at the UI?
Yeah.
And
so as
have you, in using Argo and GitOps as well, is there any other things that are challenging for you that you've found by implementing GitOps?
I don't think I understood your question completely. Sorry. Could you?
Is there any problems that you have with Argo that opposed to traditional deployments or CI/CD, for example?
I think the main problem I've come across, as I mentioned, currently was the specific to namespace, where currently there's a limitation on the namespace, and I don't use this format, which is why I raised the request, and I will be working towards actually fixing this as well, so that we have more options. So there is a challenge as well as there is a solution, right? The great part about open source is whenever there's a challenge, you can actually go out and fix it yourself.
Cool. And for those that want to kick the
So
tires on
that's
it,
one of the places.
So we've got the repo, they can clone the repo. Also, I guess there's the quick start of getting started on Argo CD as well, if you don't want to follow the Helmfile.
Yeah.
So yeah, feel free everyone to download that repo and give it a go. And if you do have any questions, you can reach out to Emmett or myself, and we're happy to help you as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, along with that, you will find that Argo has so many new extensions and features which keep coming out at breakneck pace. So you all will definitely, one thing I would suggest is joining their Slack channel. You all will find out the latest and greatest updates. The channels are very, very helpful. And if you all have any specific issues which relate to you all can just drop a text on that chat, and there are number of people who will jump in and pitch in to provide you solutions for your problems if you can't figure certain issues out.
Okay, thank you for your time. That was a great talk, and it was good to do a little bit more of a deep dive instead of people conceptually talking about it. So it was great to see some of the code and what you've achieved. It's really great work.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks. Have a good day. See you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.